Dean, Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum in Park. And usually I talk about the Civil War. However, today we're going to venture really back into the 17th century and what's known as the Anglo-Dutch Naval, which actually had a huge impact on Hampton Roads in a major fashion. And so, the big thing about the colonial era is that the conflicts in Europe spilled over to the colonies for a variety of reasons. France, Spain, Holland, or it would be called the Netherlands back then, or the United Provinces, just to be straight. And they all had their own Caribbean islands. They had their own colonies on the North American continent. And so they're vying for economic control. And in fact, so the Caribbean islands offered sugar, the South Atlantic colonies offered cotton, tobacco, indigo, and ship stores. Then also, the North Atlantic colonies were famous for furs, lumber, and of course, fish, which the Europeans loved to salt it and so forth. So the Anglo-Dutch naval wars were a series of three conflicts during the 17th century, the first one starting in 1651, the last one ending in 1674. And the whole idea is that the Dutch had rapidly expanded their economic reach, controlling places in India, Indonesia, as we know today. They actually had a colony on the Hudson known as New Amsterdam. And the English, of course, were expanding their financial outreach to colonies and so forth. Portugal at this time had controlled the slave trade, sending slaves from Africa to the New World, as we would call it, both South and North America. However, they lost their power, so to speak, thanks to the Spanish. And so the Dutch started to take over that trade, which the English wanted to take over because it was a very valuable trade, sadly. And so that's why we have these Anglo-Dutch naval wars, and that's why they come to Hampton Roads. And the real big thing that causes it is that the English really established what was known as the Navigation Acts. And there are a series of acts that continue to be created all the way through the that's one of the causes of the American Revolution was the newest Navigation Act, And basically these Navigation Acts said that you could only, if you were a colony, you could only trade with England. You can't trade with Dutch or anybody else. You could only trade with Dutch or English bottoms or ships, as they called them bottoms, but they would be ships. So that's why we have created this triangle of trade that, you go from North America in an English ship to London, drop off stuff, go to Africa, pick up slaves, or go right to the Caribbean, pick up other goods to then bring them back to North America. And the English, these laws are based on mercantile theories that the English had developed during the time period, and they wanted to control all of the maritime trade in the world, believe it or not. That is their goal. That's why they have the Navigation Acts. And they thought that the Navigation Acts would destroy the Dutch commerce or actually, limit it in every way. As the Duke of Albemarle, George Monk, who's one of the founders of North Carolina, said, what matters is not this or that reason. What we want is more of the Dutch trade. Okay, so that gives them the wherewithal. So actually, the Second Anglo-Dutch Naval War is going to be caused by the English in 1664 going up, and actually the Duke of York. This is one of the goods. Of course, this is by Sidney King showing the tobacco trade. This is New Amsterdam, New York, and that's a slave auction, believe it or not. In fact, they have two uprisings by enslaved people during the 18th century. Nevertheless, I regress. So the English capture the Dutch East Indies colony companies, Cabo Verde slave trading posts in West Africa. They conquer New Amsterdam, which this is the scene. Actually, James, Duke of York, is on one of those ships. We'll see a picture of him a little later. And they also captured several Dutch convoys. The Dutch couldn't take it anymore, and as a result of that, they declare war on England on March 4th, 1665. Now, following the First Anglo-Dutch War, which was really a draw, but the English won more battles, and they actually developed new tactics, which James, Duke of York, is going to call parallel lines. That's how we go into action, fighting with what they call great ships of the time, which will eventually become known as ships of the line. So basically, the Anglo-Dutch Naval War is going to go fairly well for the English, especially after the 4 days fight, which we see a picture of right here. And in fact, the Dutch had been so badly beaten, and Charles II is in so much need of cash that he lays up his great ships up the River Medway, which is within the estuary of the Thames River. And as a result of that, the Dutch sneak in there. They burn and capture several ships. The Medway, you can see, is right here on this map. So here are these two economic rivals striving for their control of the seas. When the war in 1667 or 1665 erupted, Virginia was virtually defenseless. So the governor of Virginia at that time was Sir William Berkeley. It's spelled Berkeley, but you're supposed to pronounce it with Barkley. Actually sent a letter to this man, King Charles II, saying, I really need to have warships. I really need to have more money. I need to have cannons. I need to have all these things because we have what is known as the tobacco fleet. And the tobacco fleet would actually all join up in Hampton Roads, and as a result of that, they would bring Maryland tobacco ships down, tobacco ships from the Rappahannock, the Potomac, the York River, and then boom, out they'd go and escorted, is what they wanted to be, but they would be a convoy. Many of these merchant ships are armed fairly well. Now, Berkeley says, I need cannons, I need powder, I need actually a guard ship because I want to enhance the anchorages for these tobacco ships at Tyndale's, actually now known as Gloucester Point, Crow-Mortain on the Rappahannock River, and Pungotig on the eastern shore, and also Jamestown. Now, Berkeley thought the fort at Old Point Comfort was the worst place to have a fort, and it had run down and everything. It was very susceptible from damage from hurricanes, etc. As a result of this, Berkeley says, I want to build these new forts. In the letter, Charles II writes back and says, oh no, you're going to rebuild the fort at Old Point Comfort. So, that is problematic for Berkeley, but he has to follow the king's instructions. So you have to realize Berkeley knew that he had a strong enough militia to really defeat any Dutch landing that might happen in England. Of course, at that time, we have these leading citizens of Virginia, like this man, Colonel Miles Carey, who is from Warwick County. Another one is a man known as Leonard Yeo of Elizabeth City County. And they could organize 900 men at a moment's notice so that they could repel any invasion. Well, finally, the English will send a block ship, or a guard ship as we call it, known as the HMS Elizabeth. That ship was a 32 gun frigate. It was built in 1647, so it was kind of old, a little rotten. In fact, on its voyage over to America, it suffered tremendous damage in a storm, and consequently, when it got to Virginia, its commander, Captain Lightfoot, now I don't, sadly, I could never find his first name, which is problematic for me. But anyway, when the Elizabeth lands here in, or comes to the James River, it delivered 10 cannons to Jamestown and then came back down to the lower James River to execute several repairs that are needed. Now, I got to tell you, the Virginia is totally unprepared, despite having the Elizabeth, to repel any type of Dutch raid. Well, it just so happens that the Dutch will strike like a crimson tide, right? Because Admiral Abraham Crimson, which the English called Crimson, who was a big hero of the 4 Days battle, was sent to the Caribbean, and while he's there, he recaptures various English possessions, like he recaptured Suriname, Tobago, and so forth. So, he's been very successful. However, before he has to go back home, he will decide that I'm going to go to Virginia and get that tobacco. Now, he's got 3 powerful ships with him: Zealander with 34 guns, the West Capel, 28 guns, and the Z Rider with 34 guns. And as they near the Capes, right, they capture a small shallop, and the Englishmen in that shallop say, "Oh my gosh, there's a guard ship, but there's nothing else. You could go in there for the taking." And so as they get ready to enter the Capes, they will capture another ship that was commanded by Robert Conway of London, and he had actually 20 guns. So he tries to fight off the Dutch. His ship is badly damaged. He's wounded. Admiral Crimson says, "You're a great guy. I'm going to give you one ship I've already captured, the Paul's Grave, and but you have to guide us into Hampton Roads." On June 5th, 1667, the Dutch flying English flags. Actually, they did their soundings as they came in the Hampton Roads towards the James River, and they shouted all of their messages in English so that no one was aware of what was happening. There are 19 tobacco ships at that time in, well, they lay between Nansmouth, what is called Nansmouth Roads, the entrance to the Nansmouth River, which you can see when you cross the Hampton or the Montreal Merrimack Tunnel, and then also right off of Newport News Point. So what the Crimson does is he sends the Zerlander to go and battle the Elizabeth, but the trouble is most of the folks, most of the crew members of the Elizabeth are in Hampton, especially their commander, Captain Lightfoot, who was supposedly, despite all these warnings from coast watchers, was attending a wedding in Hampton with a wench he brought from England. And that's a direct quote. And so as a result of that, he's not there when the Dutch show up, and the Dutch will fire 3 broadsides in the Elizabeth. The Elizabeth is in no way, they fire 1 gun to reply, and this means that Crimson kicks over the Elizabeth. He then will capture these 19 ships. Now, he doesn't have enough men to manage all these ships, and so he will actually burn 6 tobacco ships and then take 13 with him. But the big thing he needs before he leaves is he's got to have water. And so he starts landing at certain places, and he'll be repulsed by the Virginia militia. In fact, the most important battle that occurs will be at Old Point Comfort, where Colonel Miles Carey will rally his men and repulse the Dutch. However, in doing so, Carey is mortally wounded, and there is his grave. It's actually in Newport News on a place called Windmill Point. I know there are windmill points everywhere, but anyway, it's in Newport News, and you can still see the inscription. It actually says, "Oh my gosh, Miles Carey, member of the Governor's Council, a hero who gave his life in defense of the colony." Oh my, it's really kind of moving in every way. So anyway, the Dutch then will burn the Elizabeth. They can't take it. And so by June 9th, after Carey is mortally wounded on June 8th, then the Dutch are able to get some water from the eastern shore, Pungo Tig, and then they sail back to Holland. A great victory. Let me tell you, Governor Barclay is very upset. Here's a nice sketch of him. So Barclay was, he knew that the Dutch could go anywhere if they decided to come back. And so he was, very worried. And while the Dutch Crimson's fleet is still in the Chesapeake Bay, he actually arms several tobacco ships, and both in Jamestown and at Tyndall's Point. And his idea is to have a double envelopment movement to capture the Dutch. And everyone says, yes, let's go do it. But there were delays and more delays. And as a result of that, the Dutch sail away, and Barclay is very distressed. So anyway, Crimson showed the need for defenses in Hampton Roads because the Second Anglo-Dutch War may end in 1667. However, there's going to be another one because the Dutch and the English haven't resolved these trade issues. And so the Second Anglo-Dutch Naval War was actually a huge humiliation to England. It was because, number one, the Dutch could go anywhere they wanted, and there was no way that the English could stop them, even though the English won several victories during the Second Anglo-Dutch Naval War. They had their great ships destroyed while at anchor, laid up with no crews on them, and the Dutch actually take one of the ships, the Royal Charles. This is a replica of what that would have looked like. This is by the great August Crabtree, who's as you can see from this model, just a fantastic model maker. And so so this is the type of ship that he lost. Actually, see another view of it from here. Very decorative, of course. However, it was a huge, warship, and so anyway, but Barclay, after the Anglo-Dutch Naval War, terrible hurricane comes into the colony, and like they said, threw down 1,000 houses. It also destroyed the fort at Old Point Comfort, and that actually made Barclay happy. So he moves forward with trying to build fortifications at Gloucester Point, Tyndall's Point, as we call them, Coromorton on the Rappahannock River, and also a bluff at the entrance to the Nansmouth River, right? So sadly, these forts are poorly constructed. They actually, the thing on Nansmouth, you couldn't really tell if it's up there on the bluff. So what's going to transpire is that Barclay pleads for ships to preserve the tobacco fleet, and so James, Duke of York, will send 2 guard ships. One of them is the Barnaby, commanded by Captain Thomas Gardner, and the other one is the Augustine, commanded by Captain Edward Cockerell. Now, I have to say, this made the governor feel fairly comforting. However, both ships, when they got there, they needed repairs. The tobacco fleet is ready to go. However, these ships can't leave because they're supposed to escort the fleet back to England. Now, Governor Berkeley received intelligence that that the Dutch were in the Caribbean. They were threatening to come to North America, particularly Virginia. So he considered calling out the militia. However, he decides against it because there's constant conflict with the Virginia Indians, number one. And number two, there had already been the first slave uprising in Virginia, known as the Plant Cutters Revolt in 1663. So he wanted the militia to be able to guard against those things even more than the Dutch. Well, two different united provinces. Of course, this is great. When we say the lower James River, you can see what says Newport News Point, and then you look over and see Ragged Island. That's where the fleet would hang out, right at the entrance to the Nansemond River. If you look to the right, that's Pig Point, and that's where the fort was supposed to be constructed. So anyway, so the Dutch. Now this man is going to be the real hero for the Dutch during this engagement or invasion. He is Cornelius Eversten. He is a vice admiral. He was a great hero. Actually, he was considered so highly by De Ruyter, who was the leading Dutch admiral during the Second Anglo-Dutch Naval War and the Third, and served in the First, that this man, Cornelius Eversted, was given command of the Royal Charles that had been captured at the Medway, and he sails it back to Zealand. Oh my gosh, what a hero. So he's given orders to go down and try and capture an English convoy that is coming from the Far East. And another admiral, he will go named Jacob Blinks, and they will actually join up in what is known as the Caribbean. They raid several islands, they capture several, and now what are you going to do? Been successful. You want to go to Virginia and get those tobacco ships. Now, I want to tell you, Eversted is like unbelievable, brave and courageous. Actually, he was so badly wounded during the St. James fight that they thought he was going to die, but he didn't. And as a result of that, he is just one of the great heroes of the Dutch. So what happens is that the Dutch fleet begins to head towards North America. And what will happen is that the Augustine and the Barnaby, along with several armed tobacco ships, are going to be off of Newport News Point, hoping that the Dutch can be drawn in to the more confined waters of Hampton Roads, and that the English would be able to defeat them in short order. However, it's not going to happen that way, because what will transpire is that the Dutch will arrive in, of course, Lynnhaven Roads, which is right where the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel comes into Virginia Beach. And they will arrive on July 11th, 1667. And they first come in, and they will anchor there at Lynnhaven Roads. Oh my gosh, coming down the Chesapeake Bay is going to be the Maryland Tobacco Fleet, okay? And they will, when actually Gardner sees this, he knows that, well, we can't allow that fleet to be captured. So his only option was to attack the Dutch. And so what will happen? He will organize 6 tobacco transports or tobacco ships, and they're armed. And he says, "You guys are going to come with me, and we're going to attack the Dutch." So out comes Gardner, followed by Cockerill, and then by these other transports. Now, I got to tell you, 4 of these tobacco ships run aground, and another one says, "We're not going to go into this fight," and they turn and go back into the James River. So the hero of the day is going to be Gardner, because he is the lead ship, and as he approaches the Swanenberg, which is the leading Dutch ship with 42 guns, right? And as he approaches it, he's got the the wind and so forth, or we call weather gauge, and so he comes and he abruptly turns when he comes within pistol shot. He fires a broadside which rakes the Swanenberg, and then turns back to Hampton Roads. Well, Everston is not going to tolerate that, so he chases after the Gardner and the Barnaby. Now, Cockerill is going to not really be involved with the fight as much as the Gardner will on board the Barnaby. So there's a running fight, and they're bringing the Dutch towards the entrance to Hampton Roads, and voila, the Maryland tobacco fleet now slips behind the Dutch and makes it out to sea. Only one of them is going to be captured by the Dutch, so that's a huge success. The plan by Gardner and Cockerill is successful. However, what those 2 ships do, you got to remember 4 transports ran aground. The 6th one will also run aground, and as a result of that, the Dutch will capture those transports, right? And the Barnaby has suffered so much damage that it goes to the Elizabeth. Evanstead says, "Oh my gosh, I don't think I can go because of the shoals. They don't have a pilot." So Everston and Blinks seem to have to wrap the tobacco fleet, but they couldn't get at them because they just don't know the shoals and so forth. So on the next day, the 13th of July, actually, they will send some shallow draft vessels that go up into the James River. Now, they don't dare to go towards the Nansmouth because they've heard a big fort's on that bluff, which they really can't see, but also it's a very narrow channel to go into the Nansmouth River. So that's why they go up into the James River. Sadly, out of 22 tobacco ships that had gone up the James River, now 13 had hidden under the guns, supposedly, of the fort at Nansmouth River. Other ships go up the James River. Sadly, the Zeehund and the Sackercrew, I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, and another shallop will actually go into the James River, and they will capture 5 of these grounded ships. They can't get them off the mud, and so they'll burn 4 of them and bring 1 down as a prize. So Eversted had not really gained a whole lot from his invasion of Hampton Roads, thanks to James Gardner and the Barnaby. They have been foiled. So they do capture this 1 small shallop, and these guys had sailed down from New York, and of course, they asked, what's the defenses of New York like? Well, one person says, "Oh my gosh, it's the best fortified place in America." However, another person says, "Oh, look, you could sail in there and capture the whole place." So that's exactly what Everston does, is he sails up to New York, recapturing New York, and This is probably the greatest success that Everston had. And I got to tell you, the English citizenry, the colonies, were really tired of the Third Anglo-Dutch Naval War. Number one, because they really they ally themselves with the French, and actually they all hate the Catholic power French, and most of the English citizens favor the Dutch other than for economic reasons. So consequently, the Anglo-Dutch Naval War will be ended with the Treaty of Westminster on February 17, 1674. So, I mean, this is now, I got to tell you, Virginia will not be invaded by sea for another 100 years. And then their former royal masters will, of course, occupy Portsmouth and do the tobacco raids up the James River, led by Benedict Arnold, no less. Then, of course, once we gain our independence, the English will come back during the War of 1812, creating havoc up and down the bay, burning Washington, and then they leave. The war's over. But our nation finally understood what we had done wrong, that we had to have really powerful fixed fortifications defending all of our harbors. They base that on the great success that happened at Baltimore, thanks to Fort McHenry, and at Craney Island, thanks to the blockhouse on Craney Island in earthworks. So they repulsed the British both at Craney Island in June 1813 and in Baltimore September 14th, 1814. So we built a series of fortifications, which you all can see today, like Fort Monroe, the fort known as Fort Wool, which is on the Rip Rap Shoal right next to the second island of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel if you're coming from Hampton towards Norfolk. And of course, Fort Monroe, you can easily visit today. And in fact, you can go up and down the coast of America and you'll see these relics of fortifications all been built following the War of 1812. However, during the Civil War, they don't appear to be that good because they had developed what are called rifle cannon. And those rifle cannon can bore into brickwork and stonework in an amazing way. If you go to Fort Pulaski or Fort Macon in Beaufort, North Carolina, actually at Fort Macon, you can see a rifled shell inside the fort into a wall. So yes, it was very, these forts made us feel good. However, coastal defense could not keep up with steamships and rifle cannon. So what did we learn today? Well, we learned that the Anglo-Dutch naval wars are these conflicts that help the English propel themselves to become the leading maritime power in the world. And they will constantly build their ships so that they're superior design, superior armament, and superior leadership, which will enable them during the 18th and early 19th century to basically rule the waves, as the line goes. We here in Virginia, we are happy that the Dutch, we learned our lesson after the Dutch attack in the Second Anglo-Dutch War, but in the Third Anglo-Dutch War, the Virginians and the Marylanders, the big tobacco producers, were very fortunate that they were able to repulse this dynamic Dutch commander, as well as his powerful fleet that he brings with him. And so when you consider Virginia lost 10 ships and the Mariners lost 1, they could have lost over 50 ships. So the Second Dutch War is a success in the eyes of the Virginians and teaches them about fortifications. So anyway, that's my story today, the Dutch invasions of Hampton Roads. I'm sure many people didn't know that we had been invaded so many times And as you see on the screen, if you have any questions or want to suggest anything to me, there's my email address. You also can go to the Mariners Museum website, as you see here, and voila, you can read my blogs, not only for my Hampton Road series, but also for my Civil War series, which next Friday at noon, I'm going to be telling the story all about the Battle of Galveston. This is a real huge event. So anyway, if you and you also can go to the Mariners Museum YouTube channel to see this program and all other programs that I've done. So if you have any questions, please fire away.
Hi, John.
Hi, Julie.
It's Julie. We do have some questions, and of course I have some, so I'll save mine till last. But Frank Green, one of our loyal attendees and members, wants to know, in the picture of the North Sea, I guess that was the map we did.
Yeah.
I see the Dutch, English, and Spanish Netherlands.
Yes.
What was the state of France in at this time?
Well, France at this time is ruled by Louis XIV, the Sun King, and they wanted the Spanish Netherlands. The Spanish Netherlands, you know, Charles V, the Habsburg King of Spain, of Austria, of Bohemia, of what is now known as Belgium, and so they controlled the Spanish Netherlands. Actually, that what is now known as Belgium, plays a big role during the Great Armada against England. Actually, they were supposed to go there and pick up Spanish troops and then go into the Thames and land them, and voila, the English Catholics would rise up and make England Catholic again. Well, it didn't happen, as you all know. So the Spanish Netherlands, Louis XIV wanted very badly. He is unable to really conquer it in an effective fashion. Eventually, it will become part of the Netherlands when the Netherlands actually, because they had broken away from what is called the Spanish Netherlands. And so the Dutch will eventually control the Spanish Netherlands after the Napoleonic Wars. That's when the French really conquer everywhere they want, just about. And so in, I think it's 1832, I believe, they have an agreement and they divide the Belgium from Holland. The Walloons, who are the primary people in Belgium, actually speak a language more closely aligned with French, and also they are mostly Catholics versus the Dutch, who are mostly Protestant. You know, those were one of the real reasons for wars and dissatisfaction by certain people. Okay, was that good for you, Frank?
I think that's good, Frank. If not, type in some more. But Michael would like to know, was the block ship Elizabeth taken as a prize, and was it also, or was it also burnt?
It was burned. It, while coming, you remember this ship is built in 1647, so it's a 20-year-old sailing ship. Ship design and ship artillery had already changed during this period, so consequently, it was not only outdated, it was, as one person said, a relic of past heroes. And so as it came to Virginia, it encountered some severe storms at sea, so it was badly damaged. So that's why it was basically under repair when the Dutch show up. So the Dutch fire 3 broadsides in it. They fire back 1 shot and surrender. Well, when the Dutch examined the vessel, oh my gosh, they knew it was virtually a rotten hulk, as one would say, and so they burn it along with some of the other tobacco ships that they can't take back with them. They, Crimson has just over 600 men. So he didn't have enough men to operate his ships, as well as to you know, so that's why he burns some of the ships he does, and only takes 13 back with him, because you have to have a prize crew. Because if you capture a ship and you say you're going to follow me, well, you know, you can always slip away at night. So that's why they only took 13 back with them. Okay, so the Elizabeth was worthless, and so they didn't take it. Okay, next question.
Were they able to transfer any cargo from the ships before they were burned?
Oh, Daggum, right. You got to remember. You know, I have to tell you, you know, as a pipe smoker, the best tobacco was the Dutch tobacco, believe it or not. And so the type I really liked was called Amphora, which was from Amsterdam. Now, they got tobacco from Virginia, took it over there, cured it a certain way, and then sold it back to America. So it's an odd, you know, it's called triangle of trade at the best. So I would have to say that, yes, if they couldn't take the ship, they took as much tobacco as they could fit on the ships they had with them. And so what they might have left on the ship is, I'm unsure, but there is references that they loot the ship. So they take nautical instruments, they take, you know, sails, they take everything they can, plus tobacco. So that's typically what. Now these guys are all called pirates by the English, by the way. You know, so you have to realize that being pirates is you know, makes them look to be very evil, but they were successful raiding. They were actually part of United Provinces Navy. So anyway, hope that answers that question.
Well, and that makes one of mine come to the forefront here, is being a child of a North Carolina tobacco growing family and a former smoker. What state was the tobacco in when it was put on these ships? Was it, you know, dried leaves already, or was it primed?
Yes. It was already. That's how they shipped them. They actually had a position eventually in every county. It was a great sinecure, if you could get it, known as the Inspector of Tobacco. Excuse me. So they wanted to make sure that the Virginia weed, actually there's a label that calls the tobacco from Virginia weed, and so they cured it. I mean, if your family's tobacco farm, I'm sure, had a tobacco barn where they hung the tobacco. Then they would pack it into hogsheads. And then, you know, they would take them down to wharves, and that's where they'd be loaded onto various ships. So yes, it had been dried. It had been placed in a hogshead, which is easy, well, kind of easy to move. And so what you did when you got to England with this tobacco, or to Holland, they would then cure it in different ways using brandy, or, you know, various other ways of making the tobacco, as they would call, sweeter. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know why you call tobacco sweet. I haven't figured that one out yet, but some people call it that.
Well, the smell of a pipe can be sweet for sure.
Well, thank you.
And Alan would like to know, when did New York City go back to the British?
Oh, great. You know, I should have told you all, but in the Treaty of Westminster, you know, the English got all their colonies back. You know, they're negotiating with the Dutch. They told the French, too bad, we don't care about you anymore. And so the Dutch decide that Suriname was more valuable than New York or New Amsterdam was. And as a result of that, they said, well, you can have New York back. We want Suriname. And that's why you had Dutch Suriname, which was a colony until 1975. So, wow, that's 300 years it will be under Dutch control almost to the day. So, yes, they in Suriname, you have lumber, Campeche wood, and things like that. And in New York, you had furs, and they didn't understand that, they hadn't built the Erie Canal yet. So, they didn't understand the great economic value that could be found in New York City. So that's a bad move on the Dutch. But then we might all be speaking Dutch today had they kept New Amsterdam. I don't know. Okay. Next.
How long was the voyage from the Netherlands to like Hampton Roads? I mean, how long a trip?
Well, it really varied on storms. But by this time, it was 6 to 8 weeks, basically. Beforehand, they would actually, like when the colonists come, they go to the Cape Verde Islands, then cross over the Caribbean. It's all about water. And then they go north to Virginia. And so it was a much longer passage than it became, because ship major fashion during the 17th century. Ships become larger, of greater draft. The port of entry for Virginia at first was Old Point Comfort. Then it became Hampton, but the Hampton bar means you couldn't have a draft over 18 feet, which these newer ships, especially some of the, like the Swanenberg, that had a draft of 22 feet. So you can realize that's why they were so worried about the shoals and why they could only do so much while they were in Hampton Roads when Everstead and Blinks come to Hampton Roads in July of 1773. So anyway, how's that?
Well, and Michael just shared that the main city at Suriname, which we can't think of the name of the main city, still has a waterfront with Dutch buildings. So I looked it up and saw that it's quite a tourist attraction in the Caribbean these days, but I had no idea.
So, the Spice Islands, as we would generally call them, the Caribbean islands, were very valuable because just think of what pepper does to food in Europe. Just think of what sugar does for food in Europe. Because remember, they're eating a lot of salted fish, poorly preserved food, and so the pepper, the sugar, it just spices it all up. And it's like sugar was so valuable that, like if you go to Williamsburg, you'll see these cabinets they had just for sugar cones, because that's how they came in a cone like. And so, and you kept that under lock and key because you didn't want your servants, you didn't want your neighbors, you didn't want your children to get into that sugar, So it was very valuable. In fact, Alexander Spotswood, the governor of Virginia, had invested in some sugar that was brought towards Virginia in a French ship, which had been captured by none other than Blackbeard, and he shared his loot with the governor of North Carolina, and that prompted Spotswood to send an overland and a sea venture down to capture Blackbeard. And so it's actually, my house is on what's known as Blackbeard's Point, because not too far from where I'm sitting right now, is Blackbeard's Point, where they put it on an 18-foot pike, and that head stayed there for, over a year. They don't know when it disappeared, but nevertheless, it was a warning to all what happened to pirates. My house was built in 1757, so I guess the head was already gone by then. You know, I looked in my English basement for the head, but you know, it wasn't there. Next question.
I think we've answered them all. I'm just still so curious why this period of history and these wars are just so not talked about for people that like I that have lived in Virginia for a long time.
Well, the reason perhaps is that so much history gets overshadowed by the American Revolution, the Civil War. I mean, people don't talk a lot about World War One, but I'm going to do a program about the Hampton Roads Port of Embarkation during World War One sometime soon. I don't know when. You can look. The schedule is on the Mariners Museum website. But those conflicts are often overlooked, and just because you know, the Civil War, you have to realize that the largest amphibious operation of the war is on the Peninsula Campaign, landing troops at Newport News Point and Fort Monroe. And then they moved up and were stopped at Yorktown for a month by John Bankhead Magruder. Then, right where you see Newport News Point, oh my gosh, that's where the Battle of Hampton Roads took place. So those things kind of overshadow the Dutch coming in and capturing a few, burning a few tobacco ships. To the people back then, it was like they couldn't understand it, and because it threatened their livelihoods. Today we have a much more diversified economy, but yeah, it's a very overlooked topic. Why I picked it, when I guess I was in graduate school, I took a lot of English or British history, as we call it, although England hadn't unified with Scotland as of yet. And while I studied the Anglo-Dutch naval wars, and I still haven't forgotten it, so I said, you know, I could talk about that. And so that's why you got a blog, and that's why you got this program today. You know, so you can thank Old Dominion University, I think, is where I took those courses, for giving me the knowledge that I shared with you all today. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Okay, anything else?
Don,
Yeah. So
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just say that you know, I hope to see you all next Friday at noon, because the battle I'm going to talk about is so fantastic. Actually, John Bankhead Magruder's involved with it. The Confederates used cotton clads, and one officer, Leon Harvey, who was a Jewish captain, and he had been in the revenue cutter service before the war, 70 years old. He fights at the Battle of Galveston, and one of the sharpshooters that come on board from Colonel Thomas, later General Thomas Greene's brigade, right? What happens is that they go, wow, how does this cotton help? And Harvey looks at it and says, well, you know, it looks good, doesn't it? And I guess the saying, gosh, the shot can go right through it. So it was not, it's a bad concept, but for the Battle of Hatteras, the Battle of Galveston, it worked like a charm for the Confederates, and because they won the day. One Union ship is destroyed, one is captured and then scuttled. So it is an amazing story that brought, again, John Bankhead Magruder great laurels, and he becomes known as the master of ruses and strategy. So next week you'll get all that. So until then, I just leave you all with a great huzzah, and you know, everyone knows I say that, and huzzah comes from the Dutch, believe it or not. Some say Sweden, but actually becomes part of the English lexicon when King William and Queen Mary come over from Holland to take over Great Britain, or England at the time, during the Glorious Revolution, which is another whole wild story. And I'll probably tell about that as well. I don't know, one of these days. I got lots of stories to share. Let's put it that way. So anyway, thank you all so much. It's a great huzzah to you all. I'll tell you the story about huzzah another time. So
Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, John, as always. Bye-bye.
Oh, bye.